Hello, everyone. It's Katherine O'Day here, Executive Director at Save Our Shores. We're a nonprofit in Santa Cruz, California, with a mission that's pretty clear from our title to save our shores. In a nutshell, we steward clean shores, healthy habitats, and living waters to foster thriving marine ecosystems. I have with me today Jason Scorse. He's the director of the Center for Blue Economy at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. He's also a professor at the Institute and a co-author of the Blue New Deal, an ocean climate action plan. That's what we're going to speak about today. So first, let me welcome Dr. Scorse. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me. I just want to be clear here with some terminology in the beginning here. So what we're working on at the center with Blue Frontier, we're calling the Ocean Climate Action Plan. We can kind of get into the discussion of why we chose that title. The Blue New Deal is technically right now kind of a description of what we're doing that other people have used. Senator Warren actually has some initial language of a Blue New Deal. We did not have anything to do with that, but it's all kind of in the same movement. So I just want to be clear that what we're working on is called Ocean Climate Action Plan, but it's very related to what people think of as Blue New Deal.
Cool. Well, I happen to love the moniker Blue New Deal as it goes along with the Green New Deal. And, you know, there's been talk about trying to merge the two and maybe coming up with a teal deal, but we'll go with the language of an Ocean Climate Action Plan because that's what you're currently calling it. So I understand there's a couple of reasons why you've come up with this plan, kind of two key reasons, and then there's 4 elements of the plan. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the impetus for this was out of the Green New Deal, so we definitely were inspired by this, and we actually did call it the Blue New Deal in the beginning. The reason we've shifted over to a little more neutral sounding is we're trying to make this bipartisan in this era, and unfortunately right now anything associated with Green New Deal is getting attacked by the right. But putting that aside for a moment, we in the ocean community really realize that the oceans are a big part of climate change. Most people don't realize that. Most people who work on, clean energy really are thinking terrestrial. So we said, all right, let's get the ocean community here together and focus on 2 key things. So the 2 things that this plan is trying to address are using ocean and coastal resources to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, thereby, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, and then helping coastal communities adapt to climate impacts. So those are the 2 objectives of the plan, and the 4 areas that we have that kind of fit under those objectives are living shorelines and coastal infrastructure. So how to restore the marine ecosystems in our shorelines around the country, and also, in lower 48, but also Alaska, Hawaii. And to finance that, it's going to be a big financing project, all this thousands of miles of shoreline to restore them and get them resilient to climate impacts. Then the second issue is sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. So climate change impacts are impacting fisheries quite in a big way. So we want to make some adjustments to current law and also some new policies. Then the third issue is offshore renewable energy. So we clearly have to decarbonize the economy, and offshore wind in particular is going to be a big piece of the U.S. energy mix. And then the fourth part that many people also don't typically think of is the ports in the maritime sector are in many parts of the country the biggest source of greenhouse gas impacts and also air pollution. And so the ports are going to have a pretty pivotal role in this mitigation and adaptation component of the plan.
So I first became familiar with the Ocean Climate Action Plan as you and David Helvarg at Blue Frontier have been writing about and developing almost a year ago now. And so I understand it's been through at least 1 iteration. I mean, you've held a summit, I know, to bring in a lot of stakeholders and talk about the various aspects. And can you talk a little bit about how it's evolved as a result of those stakeholder input?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, so we began some initial conversations last year, early last year. Then we had this big summit in Monterey, California in October. We then used all the input from that whole year of work to create this first draft kind of agenda and priority list. We then got a lot of input on that. So we're at draft number 2 right now. And all of that, by the way, you can download from the website, the Center for the Blue Economy website, if you want to take a look at it. It's pretty short and concise, and it's easy to read. And that's the point right now before it gets into kind of legislative language. So right now, our goal is to work. We were supposed to have a big summit in DC this month of April, and obviously that got canceled because of COVID. And we're having a webinar on April 29th. And if any of your listeners want to sign up for that, again, on the Center for the Blue Economy website, there's a sign up. It's free, and it's open to people in the ocean community. And so we're going to then take that and have probably a final draft of the key priorities by the summer. And then the question is how to get that into law and policy. And so we've actually been talking to some people in the Natural Resources and Climate Committees in the House of Representatives, and there's supposedly already a bill, Ocean Climate, working its way through committee that touches on a lot of these issues. So we hope to be working alongside those efforts and putting input into that bill. The Senate will also have to write its own bill, so we're going to hopefully work with some senators to work on the Senate side. And then, as you know, there's many ways, other levels. There's executive action. If we have a new president who actually wants to do something constructive next year, we'll have executive actions we can do. The regulatory agencies, NOAA, EPA, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, has a lot of authority over offshore wind in particular. There's just a lot of ways. We can also do things at the state level. So our overall view here is we're trying to build the national coalition for ocean climate policy and then get that policy implemented across the United States in whatever ways we can, whether it's a big bill in Congress or down at a state level.
Great. So you mentioned just then there's a couple bills, or at least a bill, at least kind of in development or circulating in Congress, I imagine in the House. Can you share who has put that forward?
So it has not been put forward yet. It is still in development, but it will be put forward supposedly within the next few months, although with the COVID situation, it was supposed to be slotted for May, and now with COVID, that's put off and no one really knows. There isn't a lead sponsor yet. So it's Raul Gravala's committee in the House of Representatives. And so we talked to his chief staffer who's kind of writing the bill. And so it's hopefully within months, not longer, but it is not out for public comment yet. And so we do not have any advanced text of it.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about those 4 elements. So, obviously kind of coastal conservation, biodiversity, that seems pretty straightforward, something everybody can get behind. But when you start getting into issues like ocean energy, and I know there's been conversation around wind farms. What are you hearing, and how controversial is that? Is there a lot of support? Are people confused about what that means? Are they afraid, of what that could do to our ocean systems? What are you hearing out there from stakeholders? Yeah,
the first thing I'll just say is, even though the sustainable fisheries and biodiversity seems uncontroversial, it is actually quite controversial, so we can circle back to that. It's not as straightforward as we might hope. But on the offshore energy, from our understanding here, first of all, there's some big projects proposed off of Massachusetts, and for our April 29th webinar, we're going to have the Senator Pacheco from Massachusetts, who's been a big proponent of this offshore project in Massachusetts. We're going to have someone from Bureau of Ocean Energy Management talking about kind of citing projects off New England. And so there seems to be, I'd say, a growing acceptance that this is going to be a big part of the energy mix. I think there's a kind of a legacy of people thinking that this is going to mess up people's views and all that. It turns out a lot of the stuff here in federal waters, which is over at 3 miles or farther off the coast, is barely noticeable from the shore. So all this kind of hype about how wind farms are going to be going to be these huge blights on your view from your ocean view is actually just not true anymore. These things are very, very far off the coast. And so with some good education and just some knowledge, and I think that will erode that opposition pretty quickly. The opposition currently is still, I think the federal government's been very slow to cite a lot of these places, around the country and just really make it clear these are the places that are okay and streamline the permitting process. There's also some issues with transmission, getting this energy back, these big underground cables. There's some work being done on that. But from our understanding, it's mostly legacy opposition from communities that don't quite understand that these things aren't going to be a big negative for their property values, and then the streamlining of the permitting process. But on a positive, also here in California, we're going to get the first offshore project in California is going to be going off the Humboldt coast very soon. And it's a European company. It's actually some of our alumni are working on it in this company. And we're going to have some students working on the kind of the environmental review of that site. So it's starting, and I think people know that this is going to be a part of the mix. But a lot of what our work is doing is how can we accelerate this and scale it quickly.
Got it. Yeah. And so good to hear something's already going to be happening up in Humboldt County. I know there's also some conversation happening as there's talk about a wind farm off of San Luis Obispo that could, if not be in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, kind of pretty contiguous to it. So what about that? I haven't heard too much whether there's positive and negative feedback or what it would mean if it is in a sanctuary. How would that work?
Yeah, I don't know about the legal issues kind of with citing it in a sanctuary or even adjacent to a sanctuary. But I know there was some issues, I think, with some security issues with the Navy. Also, these turbines are going to be the floating turbines, which are a little different than other types. It's a kind of a newer technology. I think there was the same type of opposition as we mentioned earlier about people thinking it's going to mess up their ocean views. But from my understanding, overall, people want to move forward with this. It's a good project. It's been in the works for many, many years. But again, this just goes to show that these things can get stymied, and it's really slow going. And that's what we need to get over. We need to really accept that offshore wind is going to be a big part of the energy mix. We got to figure out the places that don't mess up people's views, don't mess up shipping lanes, don't mess up commercial fishing grounds, designate those, issue the permits, and then let the private sector come in and fill those up with these new high-tech wind turbines that are quite impressive. And, just so some of your audience know, I mean, some of these things are 500 feet tall. I mean, they're like skyscrapers. This is not your kind of, your small wind farm from, that you saw maybe 10, 20 years ago driving down the highway. These are massive, massive structures that generate huge amounts of power.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, speaking of those wind farms you see driving down the highway, I actually think they're kind of beautiful and picturesque. And even if, it was in my view shed out in the ocean, I'd much prefer to see that than an oil rig. And we all know the legacy of oil drilling off on our shores. And you mentioned BOEM as being part of the workshop on the 29th, April 29th. We know BOEM is still looking at offshore oil drilling and the plan that the Trump administration had for virtually drilling across our entire coastal boundary of the U.S., 90% of it anyway. Have you heard anything about where BOEM is coming down on that highly controversial issue, or have they pivoted their attention? Do you know?
Oh, I'm sure under any Trump administration officials, they are. I got to be careful here with my language. They are doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry on every way possible. One thing, though, so BOEM is all in for offshore oil, but one knockoff effect of the COVID pandemic is, as you know, oil markets have crashed and are crashing. It's not economical to do offshore oil with the oil prices right now. So again, take it as a silver lining or whatever, but right now, the COVID pandemic has done more to stymie oil development than any amount of policy we could do. The economics is the key thing. And with the oil markets depressed for quite some time, I think you are not going to see any new offshore oil drilling for quite some time. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't still be vigilant, and it would much be better to have an administration that doesn't want to open up the offshore, zones to drilling. But right now, the economics are paramount, and I can say with some certainty that there's not going to be any offshore oil drilling for quite some time.
Well, we're surely not going to let it happen in the Monterey Bay. I can guarantee you that. But yeah, so that's interesting. Let's shift gears a little bit. And you said, some of the other aspects are not as uncontroversial as you might think. I mean, one of the pieces that I'm particularly excited about, and we are here at Save Our Shores, we're one of the few local or regional in California nonprofits who are supporting and even beginning to advocate for aquaculture, particularly restorative or regenerative aquaculture. Can you talk about how that fits into the Blue New Deal or the Ocean Climate Action Plan?
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit about the permitting process there also, because like the wind farms, it's very complicated, it's very difficult, and it's sort of a barrier at this point to any new permitting in the aquaculture space.
Yeah. So one thing that we're also quite bullish on aquaculture that is sustainable. And so sustainable aquaculture for the most part is sea vegetable and shellfish. So we really think that the fin fish aquaculture is mostly unsustainable. We're not saying exclusively, but mostly. And what we're advocating is a kind of sustainability index for aquaculture that would rate which ones are the best for the environment overall. And in fact, some of them can be net negative on carbon. So they could actually be, certain aquaculture facilities that would actually take more carbon out of the atmosphere than they actually emit. And so we were trying to create a system that ranks these and then streamlines permitting for the ones that score highest on those indices. So that, I think that's kind of probably be the optimum, right? Is something that scores aquaculture on true comprehensive sustainability rankings and then prioritizes permitting for those that score the highest. Again, that would be probably our dream scenario.
And what are you hearing from the fisher community? Are they getting on board? Are they in opposition? Is it mixed reaction?
Yeah, so I think again, I think the fishing community wants protections for its fleets, and for the key thing that's going on with fishing obviously is a lot of these species are moving because of warmer waters and ocean acidification. And so they, so MPAs and fishing areas that have been designated are not necessarily going to be operative in terms of optimal fishing grounds going forward. And so I think what they're really concerned about is that flexibility being built in, and that new biodiversity protections don't necessarily conflict with their fishing operations. This is where some of those tensions between the conservation and the fishing comes up. We're trying to be neutral arbiters here and just kind of trying to get the best science out here and get the best sustainability metrics on the table, and then whatever can work within those bounds and those constraints. So we're trying to be agnostic on this, but we do see the future really being sustainable aquaculture. I think is probably going to be a bigger piece of the overall kind of seafood production in the U.S. relative to just wild catch fisheries, especially because of the impact of climate change.
Yeah, that sounds good. So again, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about ports and shipping. We're recording this here on the Central Coast. Save Our Shores operates along the coastal communities in Monterey, Santa Cruz, San Mateo, and then up into Santa Clara and San Benito. We don't have any ports in our particular region, but certainly the Port of Oakland is not all that far from us. Climate change is a global issue. It has different local impacts, but you know, what happens up in Oakland has potential to affect the air quality here, and obviously all of what's going on with climate change within California. Similarly, Long Beach in Southern California. So what is going on in that space, and what are the stakeholders saying about your plans related to ports and shipping?
Yeah. So we're really fortunate in California that we have some of the most progressive ports in the country. So Port of Long Beach, Los Angeles, San Diego, just doing outstanding work, both in kind of electrifying their systems, reducing air pollution, particulate matter, greenhouse gases, doing living shorelines, new aquaculture facilities. I mean, I've been really impressed about what's going on in California. And so what we're trying to do more right now at this stage is kind of learn what's the best practices, what are the best, most progressive ports in the country doing, and then how could we scale that to the rest of the country and maybe even push the envelope a little even on the progressive ports to even strive for something higher. Same with the maritime sector. You know, the fuel that's used in shipping is the dregs, literally the bottom of the barrel, the dirtiest fuel, because most of it's burned out at sea. And so therefore it doesn't have the impact to, you know, to cities. But once those ships come in, you know, the air pollution from all those ships idling is just incredibly damaging, especially the communities that live right near the ports. So we're just trying to learn from these examples and then see what can be done. Because again, some of this stuff takes a lot of investment. And so something that, you know, a port of Los Angeles might better afford, maybe the port in Savannah, Georgia, or the Gulf Coast that does a lot less volume isn't going to be able to afford. And so how do we figure out financing and investment to try to take best practices and spread them around the country?
Yeah, all we can do is really hope and do whatever we can to get the right people in the administration to get this through. I want to talk a moment about one thing that the COVID virus has really brought to the forefront is kind of the social injustice. I mean, in the environmental community, we've talked a lot about environmental justice for, 20, 30 or more years. The virus has really brought forth the sort of the economic disparity that exists, the situation and the conditions that poor people and people of color live in our country. How does the Blue New Deal or the Ocean Climate Action Plan address social and environmental justice issues?
Yeah. So the first thing is you're right. You know, this pandemic has kind of pulled the curtains back on things that were pretty obvious to people, but now are even more clear as day. The gross economic and social inequalities that plague our nation. And so these are pretty front and center in the Ocean Climate Action Plan. So in all of the parts of the kind of recommendations, we're always thinking about how to help low-income communities, people of color, tribal nations, indigenous groups. So again, in the ports issue, the cleaning the ports and the cleaning the air from these large ships, great for climate change, great for clean energy bills, but also great for these frontline adjacent communities that are typically people of color and low income. In terms of the aquaculture and the fishing, a lot of this is going to be to help small producers. It's going to help new industry, local production of food, right? So this, again, good for local communities. The climate, the living shoreline stuff in terms of the coastal and shoreline restoration. We see a kind of a new core of climate resilience, climate restoration professionals that could be everything from PhD level, the natural scientists, down to the people who are going to be putting in restoring the dunes and the wetlands and the eelgrasses. And this being a huge job source for, again, from the kind of high school to community college, all the way up to PhD. And this could be hundreds of thousands of jobs. And these would be good jobs, right? Think about people who work with their hands and people who are more blue collar type job who might work in a factory right now. Well, where do you want to be? In a factory, on an assembly line, or out, in the shoreline helping restore coastal ecosystems? These could be really great jobs for people, all education levels. So we're doing the best we can throughout every piece of this plan to think about the justice elements, the job elements, and especially, the employment elements for a broad swath of the populace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all really exciting, Jason. And, we at Save Our Shores are very excited about what you're putting forward. And, we're a regional organization. We don't have national influence, but what can we do? I mean, we have thousands and thousands of constituents here along the Central Coast. What can we, staff at Save Our Shores, but also all of our supporters, our friends, our volunteers, what can we be doing to support the Ocean Climate Action Plan and the work that you're doing?
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to be clear is, what we're doing is we're building the coalition. A lot of these ideas are not our own original ideas. We're helping fine tune them and maybe add a little detail to them, but we're really collecting the best ideas from around the country, building the coalition. And so we see Save Our Shores in the Central Coast as a very important part of that coalition. And so as this work continues and we start actually having bills and policies that we're going to be bringing, whether to Congress or to the California legislature, is to support those. And so we will let you know. We will keep you abreast of this. And so if it's going to be, asking Jimmy Panetta to be a lead sponsor of a bill, or telling him to, hey, we want this to be a priority for your portfolio. If it's a California bill, when we're working with the next California legislature, I know, Bill Monning is going to be terming out. He's been a big champion of this. I think John Laird's going to be trying to fill his seat. John's been an incredible champion of this stuff. But, when it comes time and we're working with him to be bringing bills to the California Assembly with Mark Stone and then John Laird to really support them and support their efforts. And I'm sure, your constituency is big enough that there's some other state assemblymen and women and senators that are, and to make sure that they're on top of it. So I think, as this progresses over the next year, we'll make sure that when the things are coming up for votes, that your constituency is alerted and can call the reps and write the reps to show their support.
Great. And we are going to be waiting and ready to go when you give us the word that we can start reaching out and contacting these important players who can make this legislation a reality. So definitely let us know and keep us posted. As we, begin to wrap up this conversation, is there anything, anything about the Ocean Climate Action Plan that I didn't ask you about, but you'd really like to get out there and have our listeners know more about?
Yeah, I think just the overall point here is I think people are in the ocean community, we really kind of take for granted the ocean's linked to climate change because we're living it, we see it, but most people don't, right? It's just still amazing. And so that's the key point I would just say is when, if conversations come up with, your friends and relatives, especially in inland states, to just keep hammering away so that these people and their constituencies and their elected officials get really comfortable with the fact that oceans and coastal communities are really on the front lines of climate change and are going to be a big part of both the kind of solutions and the kind of adapted measures. And so, because we need a broad national coalition. So I think just to have these conversations and put it high up on your radar, because again, for most people in the country, when you think climate change, they think a solar farm or something like that. They don't think of the oceans and coastal communities as really as the parts of that solution, especially the restoring, and people are used to seawalls and that kind of stuff and riprap. People don't realize that the restorative economy of building living shorelines, I mean, this could be such a huge transformation for the United States. So just kind of getting that on people's radar and making people more comfortable with it so that it's not a shock when we bring these bills to Congress and to state legislatures.
Awesome. Yeah, and so this conversation is actually part of Save Our Shores Earth Day events and things that we're doing to try and promote this now 50-year tradition. I guess I can call it a tradition, movement, what have you. So, when I hear Earth Day, I tend to think terrestrial. Maybe a lot of other people do. And I work in the ocean community. So how would you link Earth Day in the ocean? I mean, it should be a pretty natural fit, but I don't know that people are thinking about it that way. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it is fascinating that the oceans are 70% of the planet, and yet when you say Earth Day, you still think green. And again, Green New Deal and green economy. We always think green as terrestrial, and again, there's something natural to that. That even those of us who live on the coast, we're not at the beach all day, and the beach is more of a recreation. It might not necessarily be our livelihood. You know, I think maybe even more broader though is just that Earth Day, and this is a kind of a trivial point, but Earth Day's got to be every day, right? Like we have to build Earth Day into every day. It can't be this kind of add-on, right? This kind of side thing that we do every now and then. And I think that's, if anything, this moment, both because of this administration who's been so hostile to climate policy, and now this COVID that's just taking, devastating the globe here. There is no either or here, right? Either we do this for real or we have a pretty dire future ahead of us. And I think, again, I know wake up calls are kind of, again, are a little, cliche, but I hope that the fact that this COVID pandemic is corresponding with the 50th anniversary of the Earth Day celebration should be a wake up call to people that we can't compartmentalize this stuff anymore, that there is no such thing. There shouldn't be any unsustainable business activity that we support or we invest in. Sustainability has to become the norm. And that's kind of what the Ocean Climate Action Plan and with the Center for the Blue Economy, that's really the message we're trying to do, is how do we transition into fully sustainable activities so that all this legacy of unsustainable activity can be in the rearview mirror and ultimately in the dustbin of history.
Yeah. Yeah, and we here at Save Our Shores, we were hoping to make this 50th anniversary a really powerful, week and month of action. We sort of took a hard look, and what we tend to spend one day acknowledging, as you said, Earth Day. We recognize it. It's turned into more of a celebration or a day for festivals in the park, what have you. And originally it was very hardcore grassroots environmental movement. And, we were very much hoping to be able to build that kind of energy. And of course, with shelter in place and social distancing, it's a little hard to be hardcore activists right now. We are trying to record sessions like this, and we're participating in the national live Earth Day events. But yeah, I'd just like to get a message out there that, it's not about fluff and celebration. It's about rolling our sleeves up and actually doing something for our Earth, which is largely a blue planet. So with that, I would like to thank you so much, Jason, for a great conversation and for all the work that you do around a blue economy, and especially for the Ocean Action Climate Plan. If our listeners enjoyed this and you'd like to make a little donation to Save Our Shores, please go to our website at www.saveourshores.org. There's a little green donate button right on the home page. It's easy. It takes you to an online donation platform. We know it's a difficult time, so only if you have the capacity, but if you can help us out through this crisis. We're struggling like everybody else, and we want to keep bringing you great programs and bringing our mission of clean shores, healthy habitats, and living waters to a reality. And Jason, if there is a place for people to donate to the Ocean Action Climate Plan or work around the blue economy, and you'd like to share that, please let people know.
Yeah, so the Center for the Blue Economy, you can just Google that. It's centerfortheblueeconomy.org, and it'll bring you to the website. We're a nonprofit as well. It'd be great if anyone wants to make a donation. You can do so on our website. But support Save Our Shores, support whoever you can. Again, even though times are tight right now, this is when we all kind of got to step up. And I just made my donation to Save Our Shores, and I hope you will as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope people support the Ocean Climate Action Plan. So with that, we'll call it a wrap. And again, thanks so much, Jason. Wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you, Katherine.